Hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my overview of Laysara Summit Kingdom. So for those not across it on this channel, I pretty much do overviews daily, which is where I have a look at the first 2 hours of a game. That's the Steam refund window. Steam reckons, in their infinite wisdom, that you can decide whether you want to keep a game or not in the first 2 hours of play, and I would say I generally agree. 20 hours in, broadly, you're not going to change your mind from how you felt 2 hours in. So it's a short punchy video, around about 10 minutes, broad strokes info, and then I send you on your way to make up your own mind. So with that preamble out of the way, let me say, I slept on this game. It came out probably 2 months ago. Not intentionally, but I think I probably brushed over it because it has this Himalayan mountaineering theme, which isn't something that automatically jumps out and appeals to me, even though I'm a bit of a history buff, but you know, I like sci-fi, things like that. There's a million different games. Anyway, excuses aside, Scarlet, I deeply regret leaving it this long because this is easily one of the best technically solid games I've looked at this year, and I have forced myself to put it down. I played a bit more than 2 hours. I couldn't help myself. I probably put 3 hours in, but I've stopped to the point where I'm going to uninstall it. I really want to play this at 1.0. I've had such a satisfying experience with this, and I would urge anyone to go out and check it out, wishlist it, buy it, support it. If you're interested in colony building, city building, this is very much sitting in that space, kind of like with your Frostpunks and your Ixions. Though it is early access, it doesn't have a campaign yet. That's the big missing part. It's got a lot of scenarios that you can pick up. There's a tutorial one, which is, you know, walks you through it. But generally speaking, you have this sort of bubbly cast of characters. They kind of give me sort of Looney Tunes, Hanna-Barbera vibes. They're not necessarily wacky, but they're kind of wholesome. One of them's a foil, like he's a cranky blackboard sort of, God, no one's going to know that reference outside of Australia and Mr. Squiggle. More like Eeyore, I guess. It's like he's a bit of a negative Nancy, but not in the modern, you know, sardonic, emo, Twitter negative person that just wants to tear people down maliciously. He's just a foil. So you've got two bubbly characters, sort of a monk and this can-do attitude chick, and they're like, yeah, well, you know, avalanches are bad, but we're gonna do what we can. And he's like, well, I'm staying inside. And, you know, like, again, it's all quite charming, does what it's supposed to do. And in fact, you know, like, I love Frostpunk, I love Ixion, but they're very, you know, end of the world, high stakes, dreary, miserable stuff. And this is the other end of the scale. And I'm so absolutely invested in how wholesome, bubbly it is. The soundtrack, I found myself humming the little tunes. I think the theme, everything is just so wonderful and so outside of my automatic wheelhouse that it is really making me rethink things. Like, I do have an open mind and try out all sorts of games, but I never in a million years would I have thought that this would resonate so much with me. Anyway, I barely talked about the gameplay loop, but I just thought I'd cover that as well. If you look at this and you go, maybe not for me, wrong. Try it. This is an absolute testament of really wonderful artistic design. And so the mechanics, I suppose, if you want to be derivative, it's got like an Anno-like core, right? You have caste systems, and it's all based around the height of these mountain tops that you build on. You can also freely sort of rotate around. I'm using my hands as I want to do. Not quite as, you know, intimate as, say, Frostpunk's circular construction system. However, it still plays into it. So you rotate around the mountain and you essentially move up and down. And it's not explicitly obvious, but there's essentially 3 altitudes. There will be potentially, you know, 5 different levels all through, and it looks kind of organic, but it's all quite mechanically sound. And you'll have to figure out where the different altitudes are at, because that plays a lot into sort of yields. Anyway, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Covering off the Anno stuff, you have these castes. You've got like lowlanders, I can't remember, I think the other dudes are called artisans, and then you've got monks as well, so they are kind of tiered and they sort of do want to move further up the mountain. Not explicitly from the individual units themselves, but more like the goods that they demand. And so that's the centerpiece of it, is that each of the dudes require certain, you know, food types or like religious components. I can't remember what it's called, but things like, you know, praying and that sort of stuff. So it's all very in theme with this sort of culture. One of the really inspired things it does, UI is so clean and just readable, is like, yes, they'll demand food, but it will let you decide what food it is. So in order to go from like a level 1 to a level 2 hut, normally in an anno it'll be like, well, you need bloody wood or beer or something, like it'll be very specific. Whereas this, it will say, well, essentially you need maybe 2 foods and 1 sort of tool type, or utensils is one of the things. So it has these delineated sections, but it kind of lets you choose what you're going to put in there, which is great, actually. Like, it might seem like a small thing, but that is a monstrous innovation, and it gives you a lot of freedom. The other really big core of this game, which I think would frustrate me in other games, and you're going to have to bear with me on the pitch, is positioning of real estate, like really making the spaces work. You have a limited build area, but you have free moves as well. So as in, once you build a building, you can freely move it anywhere on the mountain, pretty much, because the gameplay loop is designed around that. And honestly, that sort of thing is usually secondary. It can be quite frustrating at ranges, but generally speaking, it's a punishment system in most games. In this, it is a core which introduces a real puzzle type, where you're trying to squeeze as much crap as you possibly can into one spot, and you're trying to move it around and get all the synergy and interplay to work. My point is that normally that sort of mechanic will make me turn my nose up. Here, it is actually a centerpiece, and it's very considered. Did I mention that I think all the gameplay mechanics are solid? Because they are. As far as yields and food items and that sort of stuff, I suppose I could give you like anecdotal evidence. So, okay, try an example. The lowlanders. The lowlanders like to eat a type of wheat that gets milled, right, which is pretty par for the course, and the production chain is the little wheat field and the mill house. And you can place these down, and all you gotta do, you just gotta hold left click, drag onto the next building, release. It's smart enough to figure out the rest, and then you drag it to a distro center, and then you can mouse over that and it highlights all the roads as well, and you basically put that in the center of your residence. So it's got all the mechanics, but it's arguably smoother than I've ever seen in any way. Now the wheat field will have stats on it. Essentially, the yield that comes out of it will vary depending on the altitude, low, medium, high, that you place it on. And in this case, you want it on the low, it'll give you something ridiculous, like 9 wheat, whereas if you had it on the top altitude, it'll give you 2. You build bridges and all sorts of things, and you have a yak system where you can essentially tech up and tier up and transport stuff from one platform to another, but at a fairly great manpower cost. And the game is actually really quite challenging. I have bricked colonies. It doesn't take much. It's not like you can get a loan when you're a bloody monk up a Himalayan mountain. So if you bankrupt your system, that's it, you're done. So you have to really balance your economy as well, and I kind of love that. I kind of love how tricky it is, and if you do not build in appropriate bite-sized chunks, you will eat shit. But and so the further apart that you're trying to transport things, the more of a yak demand there is, so then you have to find these large fields of yaks and place them down. And so while you could grow that wheat on the bottom field, you can feasibly transport it further up to maybe the monks at the summit doing all the research in their monastery. God, I gotta stop talking about it. It makes me want to play it some more, which is the greatest testament. But other examples, like there's apiaries which only really want to grow in the center, right? And if you put them at the top or bottom, they don't go so well, so you get less honey yield. Then you got all sorts of things. You can house yaks in sort of like actual farms, so not for transport, where they will provide wool and milk. Now, if you put them at a lower altitude, they'll generate more milk. At a higher altitude, they'll generate more fur. So what are you using it for? There's also a whole pathing system for splitting resources through these sort of node buildings, and it's just, oh, it's chef's kiss. Everything about this is so considered. There are antagonistic components, such as avalanches, and you can build essentially forestry areas to try and withstand the avalanche as a sort of break wall as well. I'm just really impressed with where it is right now in early access. And as I said before, in a melancholic sort of bittersweet way, I've had such a great time with it. I'm probably going to put a pin in it and just let it sit and come back and review it in full when it hits 1.0. Anyway, beyond that, anything else would be waffling. I hope I've at least made you curious about this, especially if you're a fan of this sort of genre. But yeah, probably put a pin in it there and finish up. Team, I might just leave it there for the time being. I'll catch you guys on the next one.